Okay, as we publicized a couple of months back that we will have this online class on a course on what is called the Buddhism and constitutional law. And one of my friends, his name is Dhananjay Vanjari. He will be joining in maybe January because he's right now a little bit busy with some official work. So my name is Mangesh Dhahiwale, and uh, a brief background about me. I am an electronic engineer by education, and then I worked with the Indian Civil Services for a couple of years, 4 years, and then after that I have been traveling quite a lot, not just in India but also abroad, particularly in the Buddhist countries, to talk about the movement of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, and I'm also a part of an international Buddhist movement called Socially Engaged Buddhism. So this course, which is titled as Buddhism and Constitutional Law, has a lot of implication, and a short note that I sent to you all will give you a background and the scope of the studies that we will be undergoing for the next maybe 2 months, and every weekend, maybe on Saturdays or Sundays, we'll be meeting for 1 hour or maybe more, maybe 2 hours. We will see how it goes, and then there will be enough scope for all of you to talk about. These online classes have its own limitations, but it has one of the positive sides that it doesn't matter wherever we are situated, wherever we are based, we can still get connected and talk about a lot of things and can learn a lot of things together. So having said this, this topic of Buddhism and the constitutional law is a very vast topic. So I'm going to begin today with talking a little bit about Buddhism and its how it generally relates to the society and to the politics around, and even to the extent of economics and so on and so forth. Because whenever we think about Buddhism, we have this notion in our head that Buddhism is about meditation, Buddhism is about transforming our minds, Buddhism is about spiritual awakening. The Buddha stands for the spiritual enlightenment and awakening, but that's also true. That part of Buddhism is not wrong, but the Buddhism is much more than mere a kind of technological tool to transform our minds. Though it's a very essential function of Buddhism is very vast, and it encompasses the whole gamut of what we can say human experiences and human societies. So basically, when we are trying to know what is Buddhism, it itself a very vast topic. As we might be aware that Buddhism is the first global movement in the history of the humanity that has transcended the barriers of the cultures, the languages, and so on and so forth. So it's very difficult to pinpoint what is Buddhism, because if we take the historical snapshot of the history of Buddhism, starting from the Buddha's enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, to the growing interest in Buddhism in the West, the revival of Buddhism in China, and the revival of Buddhism in this very land where the Buddhism disappeared a few centuries back and revived by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar in 1956. So if you look at this historical range of Buddhism, the history itself is very vast. As it is said that the history of India, the evidence-based history of India begins with the history of Buddhism, and that's the concrete point in the history of India where we can begin to find the various evidences, material evidences of something which has had a very popular base. So if you look into the history of 2500 60, 70 years, it's itself a huge sort of a time span in the human history, where some belief system had been continuously helping people of different cultures. So I'm not going to go into the historical details about Buddhism, because it doesn't much pertain to what we are going to study, but just as a way of making you understand the scale of history that we are that is called Buddhism. It's very vast, starting from the Buddha in Indian context up to Baba Sahib Ambedkar. So it's a long history. So it's very difficult to pin down what is Buddhism. Then secondly, if we look at the philosophical aspect of Buddhism, if you just begin to look into the sort of what is called the philosophical schools in Buddhism, there are, of course, this traditionally what they call the three yana, like Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. But even within these three yanas, you get many philosophical systems, many philosophical systems. All the way from people talking about the nature of consciousness, all the way up to people, the Buddhist philosophers talking about the relativity, the theory of relativity, that nothing is absolute, everything is relational, like everything is relative to each other. So you see, if we look at even the philosophical schools within Buddhism and the great Buddhist philosophers which the Buddhism has seen, not only in Indian subcontinent, like the great philosophers like Nagarjuna, or the Vasubandhu, Asanga, and Dignag, Dharmakirti. If we talk in India in terms of the Indian context, the philosophical systems that has emerged in that vast container of Buddhism, there are so many. And as a matter of fact, the Buddhists were the first in the history to develop the centers of knowledge productions. For example, the big universities, the massive universities, we can at least find 9-10 big Buddhist universities in the Indian subcontinent itself, like Takshila, Nalanda, Vikramshila, and Vallabhi, and whatnot. So the point here is very clear, that if we want to study Buddhism in terms of its philosophical systems that have developed within what is called Buddhism, there are many philosophical systems. All the way ranging from the understanding the nature of the human mind, the philosophical, the psychological dimension of the human experiences, all the way up to the talking about the nature of reality itself in terms of the relational and relative nature of everything. When we talk about the geographical spread of what is called Buddhism, it's from the Afghanistan to Sri Lanka. There is no place in this country where you will not find the Buddhist remains. You go Tamil Nadu, you go Kerala, you go Karnataka, you go Andhra, you go Maharashtra, you go anywhere, you go any direction in this country, you cannot but find out the presence of the geographical spread of Buddhism in the ancient India. But when we are talking about the modern times, we definitely know how the Buddhism has transformed the Chinese culture, to the extent that it has revived what is called, or given a new dimension to the Chinese language. The same is true with Tibet, Mongolia, Thailand, Cambodia, Japan, Korea. These countries, we cannot. If you remove the Buddhism from these cultures, it's very difficult to talk about these cultures without Buddhism. So you see, when we are talking about the geographical spread of Buddhism, and it's still expanding, when the people in the West, in the Western countries, people are taking lot of interest in what is called the Buddhism. And you see, that is how the Buddhism has this huge geographical expanse. I was talking about the expanse in in India. The languages in India, for example, owe it to Buddhism. The scripts that we use today, they owe it to Buddhism. The architectural marvels that we see in this country, they owe it to Buddhism. The arts, the architecture, the paintings of Ajanta, and this stone cut temples that we witness all over the places in India, they owe it to Buddhism. But it's not just about India. If you go to Sri Lanka, you'll find a similar case. If you go to Nepal, you will find a similar case. You go to China, Japan, Korea, Thailand, Mongolia, Laos, Vietnam, and whatnot. So you see, the geographical spread of Buddhism, what is called Buddhism, is very vast. In terms of denominations, there are, one of the most, fashionable form of Buddhism is, of course, Zen Buddhism. The more emphasis on meditation. The word comes from the Pali word jhan, or the Sanskrit word dhyana. And the Zen Buddhism is so popular that a lot of celebrities, they proclaim their allegiance to Zen Buddhism, like the founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, and there are a lot of famous people in the world in the contemporary times who claim their allegiance with what is called Zen Buddhism. And then there is Shin Buddhism, which talks about the Pure Lands, and there are many schools, not just philosophical schools, but the schools in Buddhism. And therefore, you see, in terms of the vastness or the diversity of the schools, the Buddhism is very, very, very vast. So why I am providing this background to you, that here in this course, we are not going to study Buddhism as such in terms of its historical development, or its philosophical schools, or its geographical expanse, or its varieties of the thoughts, the systems of thoughts that have been developed in Buddhism. Our approach will be to understand the basic teachings of the Buddha, and how that relate to the topic that we are going to discuss or learn in the course of our course. So as I said, that is very difficult to pin down what is Buddhism, and the Buddhism is so dissimilar. One school of Buddhism is so dissimilar compared to other school of Buddhism. There was a time before there were the communication of channels were not so much developed, and I said in the World Conference of Religion, the representatives of the Mahayana were talking about Buddhism, and the Theravadins were talking about Buddhism, and both of them couldn't make sense, because they were talking about so much diversity of the views that people were confused as to what is the Buddhism, what the Buddhism really is. So it's not a domain that is very simple. It's a vast domain. The historical scale is very vast. The philosophical traditions, the schools are very vast. The inquiries in the domains are in the diverse fields. So what I'm going to do today is to just chalk out some of the areas where we are going to look at. So what is the essence of Buddhism? If somebody asks us to define what is Buddhism, and it's not an easy task to define Buddhism. So I'm going to rely a lot on how Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has developed these various thinking tools, as it were, to make sense of Buddhism. And as we know that he was a long-standing student of Buddhism, he was a long-standing student of the constitutions. So I'm going to go, back and forth to his thoughts. So he has attempted to define what is Buddhism in terms of, the very thing that the Buddha did after he taught Buddhism to the 5 disciples after his enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree. He went to teach his former friends, and there the Buddha has tried to define the Dhamma. And Dhamma is, of course, Buddhism is called by very many words. So in Pali, you call it Dhamma. In Sanskritic tradition, you call it Dharma. In China, you call it Fojiao, or Buddhism. In everywhere, it has got this different name. And this word Buddhism itself was not is a modern creation. It's a creation of what is called the Indologists. So in some countries, the Buddhism is called Buddha Sasana, the law of the Buddha. We of course know the word Sasana. So the confusion begins with the word itself as to what does this word Buddhism connotes. So we will go back to that first discourse of the Buddha, where the Buddha has gone to his 5 friends, and he has taught them the Dhamma, and he has taught about 60 people by the time. And after the end of his teaching session, in the beginning of his career, he told them this sentence in Pali. The sentence goes like this: Charata bhikkhave charikam bahujan hitaya bahujan sukhaya lokanukampaya attaya hitaya. Now I'm going to just break up these words. Charata bhikkhave means, bhikkhave is of course the word for the Buddhist monks. It includes all of us, or those who are trying to understand the Buddha's words. Charata means walk, or it's important. We can translate it also like strive. Strive for what? Charata bhikkhave charikam bahujan hitaya bahujan sukhaya. So bahujan means multitude of people, limitless number of people, many people. Charata bhikkhave charikam bahujan hitaya. Hitaya means the welfare. Bahujana sukhaya. Sukhaya means happiness. Lokanukampaya. This word is very important because it captures the very essence of Buddhism. Lokanukampaya. Lok, of course, means people. Anukampa means, kampa is a word, kampati means vibration. Anukampa means vibrating together. Hitaya sukhaya. So you see this, if you want to get down to essence of Buddhism, these 3 words, very important words, are we need to bear in mind. First is striving for what? Striving for Bahujanitaya, means for the welfare of multitude, many, limitless beings. Secondly, the happiness of the many people. Why? Lokanukampai. That we should vibrate together with the humanity. So I told you the meaning of the word Lokanukampaya. Kampaya means kampati, vibrating together. Now, if our mind comes into contact with the suffering, then the heart of the Buddha is to vibrate it with the suffering. That means automatically the compassion will come forth to help people who are in suffering. So the compassion is very, very important, or the sense of Buddhism. If we come in contact with the people who are progressing, then there will be naturally a joy arising in our hearts. So that's called mudita. So karuna and mudita. And if we cherish these values limitlessly, it's called upekka. It's a psychological term, which means that whenever our hearts are filled with limitless compassion, then we transcend the borders of barriers of space and time. Now, all this is possible only when we have this fundamental identification with other human beings. And this fundamental identification with other human beings, there is a technical word for it in Buddhism called metta, me atta. And in traditional Indian languages, we call it maitri. But we will stick to the Pali word metta. So if we look at this word lokanukampai, the four words that we need to bear in mind at this stage are metta, karuna, mudita, and upekha. So I would request all of you who are going to participate in this course to bear this four words in your mind. So when we are looking at the word metta, means just like me, as Baba Ambedkar says, as I am, so they are. So the core value that the Buddha brought in this world was the value of equality. Never ever in the history of the world or humanity, this value was taught so forcibly the way the Buddha did. And that is the reason, because it transcended the barriers between the human beings. The radical equality is the core value of Buddhism. So when we are talking about the essence of Buddhism, I would like you to bear these words in your mind. Bahujan Hitaya, Bahujan Sukhaya, Lokanukampaya. These three words are absolutely important for us to bear in our mind when we are talking about. As I told you, as a background, that the Buddhism is a very vast, just to give you an idea, if you collect the Buddhist texts in China, and if you stack them up, they said that it might form the 80-storied building. Now that might be an exaggeration, but you can understand the kind of scriptures, the kind of texts that are available. Isn't it? So this is what is the essence of Buddhism. And the Buddha was often asked, what do you teach? He was often asked, what do you teach? The Buddha said, I only teach two things. One is dukkha and dukkha nirodha. I only teach two things. What do I teach? I teach the dukkha and the end of dukkha. So we are all going to look into all these things I'm going to unpack all these concepts over the period of time as to how did the Buddha understand dukkha? Because we all have experience of dukkha. We all have experience of suffering. Isn't it? And how to end that suffering is the purpose of the Dhamma. That is the goal of the Dhamma. That is the goal of the Buddha's teachings. So that's another way you keep in your mind when we are talking about the essence of Buddhism. The third thing that we will be looking at in terms of what is Buddhism or essence of Buddhism as to how the Buddha defined his way to end the suffering. That is the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path can be distilled down to three words: Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Ethics, concentration, or meditation, whatever we call it, and the insight or seeing the way it is, seeing everything the way it is. Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. So of course we can go on extending this list further, but the Buddha has given the list of 37 wings of enlightenment. Bodhipakkhya Dhamma, when he was passing, he was attending to Mahaparinibban. In the last sutta, the Buddha has given the list of his teachings in a form of a list. 4 these, 3 that, 5 these, 8 that, 7 that. Okay, so in total they are like 37 items there on the list, and we can look into that. So when we are talking about Buddhism, we have, as I began, Buddhism has got this psychological dimension, it has got this philosophical dimension, it has got this cultural dimension, it has got this very deeply enriched artistic tradition, and it has dimension. It has got this what is called the medicinal dimension, and it has got many dimensions. Recently, a few great people, Buddhists in the world, are articulating what is called the socially engaged Buddhism. So the Buddhism which is socially engaged and trying to make sense of the Buddhism in terms of how to transform the societies, how to transform the politics, how to transform, the economics and, so on and so forth. Isn't it? There is, of course, a lot of now interdisciplinary studies where people are talking about the Buddhist economics or Buddhist psychology or Buddhist politics or, Buddhist culture, Buddhist arts, Buddhist aesthetics. There's so many things that are being talked about. So, so for a lot of people, Buddhism is just about meditation. We know that these days, some of the schools of thoughts are in fashion, like people go to practice vipassana, which is very good. People go to different teachers to practice. Then there are Japanese forms of Buddhism, like Nichiren Buddhism, where people, middle class Indians, they go and to learn to practice. So there is vast domain, and that's why I thought today to give you this very idea of the vastness of the subject that we are going to deal with. Having said this, when we are looking at the state, the law, the constitution, the society, the democracy, where do we look at it when we look at when we look into the Buddhist texts? So basically, there are, traditionally the Buddhist canonical literature is called the Tripitaka, or three baskets, because in the ancient times, the Buddhist scriptures were written on the palm leaves or in the buck leaves, and they were tied together with a string. That's why they were called the sutras, because they were tied with the string. And when they were put, they were so vast that you have to put in the basket. So there were three baskets, and they are traditionally called the Tripitaka, three baskets. So one of the basket is called the Sutta Pitaka. So the Sutta Pitaka is a vast body of teachings of the Buddha, where the Buddha has given many sutras. So now eventually we are going to look into some of the sutras that might be useful to us to understand this particular subject. There are many sutras. In Sutta Pitak, there are basically 5 Nikayas. Yes, you see the 3 Pitak, Sutta Pitak, where they are majority of the text there are the sutras, teachings of the Buddha. And this one particular Pitak is divided into 5 Nikaya. So longer one, Dig Nikaya, and Sayukta Nikaya, Majjhim Nikaya, Angutar Nikaya, and Khudak Nikaya. And each of these Nikaya has a lot of texts. Okay. Then there is another body of, there is another Tripitaka called the Vinaya Pitaka. Now, Vinaya is about the law governing the community of the bhikshus. So, Vinaya Pitaka is going to be our important source to understand the law and the constitution. Because, it's said that the Buddha has modeled his Sangha on the basis of the republic bodies or the democratic bodies existing at that time. Isn't it? So we are going to look into a lot of these dimensions of the law and into that Pitak called the Vinaya Pitak. And there is a third Pitak which talks about the psychology of mind, the various mental states, very philosophical. It goes on detailing out every single mental state that we might experience. It's called Abhidhamma Pitak. So very philosophically subtle and very philosophical deep sort of a Pitak. So when we're talking about the sources from which we are going to study, some of the primary sources, we are going to look into some of the sutras from Sutta Pitaks, a lot of text from Vinaya, and maybe something from Abhidhamma Pitak. And of course, the history of Buddhism, the Japanese constitution written by Shotoku. The Bhutanese model of development in terms of the gross national happiness, and Thailand and Sri Lanka making special references to Buddhism in their constitutions. But the most important for us will be to look at our context, Indian context, because the Indian constitution was drafted mainly by Baba Ambedkar, and he was a Buddhist, and when he talked about the liberty, equality, and fraternity, which are like the values in which our country is constituted, he said that I have not taken these values from the French Revolution, but I have taken these values from my teacher, the Buddha, from my master, the Buddha, isn't it? So these new values of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which sort of constitute the Indian Republic. And Dr. Baba Ambedkar is saying that I have not taken them from the French Revolution, but from my master, the Buddha, isn't it? So we have a lot of material to look into how these Buddhist texts, Buddhist history, and these various Buddhist values translates into the constitutional values. Particularly when we are talking about the constitutional values, we are going to talk about liberty, we are going to talk about equality, we are going to talk about fraternity or community, we are going to talk about dignity of human beings, we are going to talk about justice, and we are going to talk about what constitutes a nation, isn't it? And this brief sort of an introductory lecture will I hope it will help us to just have this idea of how the subject matter that we are going to deal with, and the vastness of the matter, subject matter, and the depth and the need of it today, for not only to our country itself, but the whole humanity. How does it make sense to the other human beings? So I think with this brief introduction, I thought I will just introduce you with the scope, the length, and the breadth and the depth of what we are going to study for the next 2 months. So I was just trying to do that in this introductory class. So what we will do, I would like to invite some of you to reflect on what I talked, and maybe share how would you like to, or what motivated you to join, or how we are going to benefit from this. So let me open up this class for any reflection, anything that any one of you would like to share. I hope you understand. Before you joined the class, I'm sure most of you were in the blank as to what's going to happen and what is the subject matter, how these two disparate disciplines of Buddhism and constitutional law come together. And when you begin to look at this particular domain of Buddhism and constitutional law, we begin to see that this is something which is vitally important. This is something which we need to study. This is something which we need to understand. This is something that we need to get acquainted with, not just for our sake, but for the sake of the country and for the sake of humanity. So kindly,
thanks a lot, sir, for starting this. Sorry.
Yes, Umesh, please.
Thank you so much for starting such a beautiful and very insightful session, and the topic and the journey. And the reflection is this: we want to learn how this Buddhist philosophy is inculcated in our constitutional values, and how these constitutional values will inculcate in our lives. And that is lacking, that means in the present scenario, and in the past we have seen this, and the preamble almost reflects the way of Buddhism, I hope.
Yes, that's true. You see, when we are conducting these classes, please understand that it's not going to be just one way. It's not just that I am going to teach you something. I want, most of you, I have seen your profiles. Most of you are very committed students of a lot of different disciplines. I would like all of you to bring your experiences, your knowledge, you question, bring your curiosities, bring your inspirations in this class. And, we learn together. In a sense, in this process, it's not just that I teach, but we learn together. So, I think what Umesh has talked about in terms of how the Buddhist values are mainstreamed in our constitution, and how we can mainstream these constitutional values, which are they are not just slogans. Liberty, equality, and fraternity, they are not just the political slogans. If I don't like to use this word, spiritual word, but they are the human sort of values, isn't it? Without those values, no society can survive. No society can make a progress. So how do we mainstream these values into the society, into particularly the Indian society, which is full of a lot of contradictions, isn't it? So we are going to look at what is the democracy, what is the social democracy, how does that relates to the Buddha's vision of the world, isn't it? So thank you, Umesh, for that. It helps a lot to know that this is what you are trying to seek. Anyone would like to say anything? Please feel free. It is not, we are not judging anybody, and there are the limitations to the online classes, isn't it? So don't hold yourself back. Just put yourself across. There is nothing to hold on to. Just be free. Just imagine that you are in the Buddha field. So there is nothing that should inhibit you. Dara, do you want to articulate what you have written in the group? Dara? Yes,
Am I
please.
audible, sir?
Yes, Dara. Yes, please.
Metta is like I am as you are. So if we see another human being as we are, so it creates fraternity
True.
as well as equality.
True. Very true. That is the basis of equality. When we have this vision of looking at other people the way we look at ourselves,
Yes.
isn't it? So you are right. The
Thank
way.
you, sir.
Yes, Dara.
I also attend Buddha in his Dhamma lectures on YouTube.
Yes. For some of you who might need to learn more about the Buddha and his Dhamma, we have a running class where there are 55 lectures available, and they will more. So please, you are free to use that material, Dara.
Thank you, sir, for creating.
Welcome, Dara. But this simple formula, as I am, so they are, is such a revolutionary formula, because all the time we are trying to put other people into various categories, creating barriers between the two human beings. And the Buddhism is all about breaking those barriers between the human beings. It's about creating that harmonious society, which is a possibility that we have seen in the Indian history. When we talk about the Ashokan governance, the welfare state that Ashoka founded, isn't it? Amartya Sen, describes Ashokan state as the welfare state. So we have to understand these various concepts of a welfare state versus the states which are now running after profits, running after religious goals, whatnot. So there is a lot of things that begins there. Just to supplement Dhara's point and to connect it with how does it relate with us. You see, when we learn to look at other human beings the way we will look at ourselves, that creates an attitude of respect and reverence for other human beings. And in the scheme of democracy that Baba Ambedkar has defined, he said that democracy is an attitude of respect and reverence towards a fellow human being. You cannot have democracy, you cannot have a democratic society if this attitude of respect and reverence towards other human being is not cultivated. And it needs to be cultivated. It needs to be practiced. It's not easy, isn't it? So democracy in this scheme becomes a complete ethical sort of a system, isn't it? You cannot diverse democracy from the ethics. And that's what is going on. That's what's happening in the so-called democratic countries, if you look around. So thank you, Dhara. Anybody else? Anyone?
Yeah. Hi, sir. Sir, I'm Anita and I'm
Hello,
a professional
Anita.
social worker. Yeah. So, in general, I've been very intrigued by religions, and I have very limited reading about Buddhism, but I have always wanted to know more about it. And today, the introduction that we have just had, it just opens up so much scope. And as you rightly presented, that the idea of Buddhism is very much connected to meditation and
actually could be mainstream is something, which I would really want to explore more as the course goes by, and how it's actually linked with the constitutional laws, and how Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, which I'm really interested in, looking forward to learn more. So the introduction itself has been like really overwhelming for me in terms of knowing that there's so much more scope in Buddhism. So I'm actually looking forward to the next 2 months of getting totally drenched in Buddhism and knowing more about it.
Yes. Anita, I must warn you here that the Buddhism is such a vast field. Once you enter, you cannot find your way out. So, I should warn you, because
that's exactly what I'm looking at. So this is something which I want to practice.
Yes.
So this is exactly what I think in the 2 months, if in case I am able to do that, then I think nothing more than what I can get in this course.
Very good, Anita. Thank you. You see, this there are very many definitions of Buddhism, and we have seen the scale or the vastness of the Buddhas, the schools that have been developed in the Buddhism. The first difficulty is whether Buddhism is a religion. So all the people are talking about their religion as a way of life, isn't it? So we have to understand Buddhism. Just religion is this very is a word that the modernity has thrown upon us. What is Buddhism a religion? How do you define religion? Isn't it? And Baba Ambedkar has very meticulously tried to separate the religion and the Dhamma. So religion being your personal practice that has to do with whatever God that you practice or profess. But the Dhamma has ultimately to do with the people, other people. Has to do with other human beings. So there is a complete shift in the attitude. And when we talk about Buddhism, we cannot talk about Buddhism in terms of this very myopic concept of religion. It's a civilizational project, as some of you have begun to call it. When we talk about Buddhism, we cannot but talk about Buddhist civilization, isn't it? And the civilization, when we talk about the civilization, it is a very huge sort of a scope, and we have seen that how Buddhism has been a civilizing force for the humanity in the history. Imagine, Mongolia before, the Mongolians encounter Buddhism, or any country before, the way Baba Ambedkar says that the Buddha has transformed the tribal ethical system into the universal ethical system. Before that, the concept of justice was limited to the tribal concept, eye for eye. If you kill the member of my tribe, the only way to settle the justice was to kill the member of your tribe. Isn't it? So the Buddhism is like a rupture in the history of humanity. Buddha is like the light that has emerged in the history of humanity, which has completely transformed the course of the history of the world. You see, Anita, what I'm trying to get it at? So, in terms of the Buddhism, and we will, of course, we can look at the comparative study of the religions. How is Buddhism different from Hinduism? How is Buddhism different from Islam? How Buddhism is different from Christianity, and so on and so forth. Because at some point of time we have to launch our inquiry into that area, comparative study of religions. But Buddhism is I would say beyond so-called the religions. It's something which all the human beings need all the time, isn't it? So when I'm going to come back to this discussion, when we are talking about the dukkha or suffering, isn't it? So what are the various kinds of suffering? How does the Buddha classify various kinds of suffering? What are the ways out of various kinds of suffering? For example, in the Indian context, when we talk about the Indian context, isn't it? We talk about the structural suffering due to the caste system, isn't it? Then there is a structural system of racism. Then there is a structural system of the gender inequality, isn't it? The patriarchy. It is itself a structure which produces a lot of suffering for human beings, isn't it? So you see what I'm trying to get it at, Anita, is we are not just studying a religion. We can of course study Buddhism as a religion, but there are the ways in which we can study Buddhism as a kind of a secular, school of thoughts. a secular political school of thought, secular economic system. You see what I'm trying to get it at? So thank you, Anita. We will try to cover as much ground as we can, and in the course of our classes. So anybody else, or I like to keep the classes very short, and offer you a lot to reflect on, and I hope that you will begin this process of reflection within yourself. Think for yourself, because the aim of the classes is not to induce you any ideas. You if you can think for yourself even a bit, the purpose of the course is, I think, met. So the aim is to urge you to think for yourself, to explore, to have this curiosity, to dabble with these ideas that we are going to expound in this course.
So one
Yeah.
submission is there. Sorry.
Umesh, anybody? You can raise your hands. That way it's easy.
Jai Bhim, sir.
Jai
Jai
Bhim.
Bhim, Mangesha.
Yes.
Prashant Vasnik this side, and Jai Bhim to all ladies and gentlemen. Basically, sir, my purpose of joining this course was to understand basically what Buddhism is. Because I am born and brought up in Nagpur, which is said to be a very, core for Buddhist people. But as I have understood in all my years, is that the Buddhist people themselves are not actually following Buddhism to the T, what they define Buddhism. And what I have understood about Buddhism is that Buddhism is not a religion, it is more of a philosophy. Because if we see religion, what it means, belief in something superhuman or something divine. And what Buddhism teaches is the truth about life, what life is actually. And there is no mention of these divine and powers and everything. So this is basically my understanding, and it's very I have a very less understanding. I would like to understand more.
Yes.
That is my purpose of joining this.
Right.
Yep.
Now, as we explore, we will begin to know more. See why the people don't practice Buddhism, because they don't know what is it, isn't it? So learning, studying is a very important step in following anything. So the more clarity we have as to what it is, then the more easier for us to practice it, right, Prashant?
Correct, sir. It is more of like a way of living your life rather than religion.
Yes, definitely, Prashant. Umesh bhai.
So my submission was this, that we need to read some base papers to conceptualize the things in a better way, and you can better guide us in that.
Do you want me to give you a reading list? Hello, Umesh bhai.
So any base paper we need to read regarding these two things that we are going to learn.
I will give you. What I'm thinking at this moment is, just to acquaint you with this two domains, and there is not much, on Buddhism and constitutional law. There is, of course, nothing much available in the academic world about Buddhism and Indian Constitution and Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. We know how the Indian academia has been so putting this iron curtain over Babasaheb Ambedkar. Now it's beginning to be raised just now, and I reckon that in a couple of years you will find a lot of material being produced written on these aspects, isn't it? So I will give you some reading list so that you yourself can go through it a lot.
Thank you. Thanks. That will help, sir. Thank you so much.
All right, then I think this is a good start for our course, and we'll catch up next week with more nuanced way of looking at things. And meanwhile, I would request you to explore yourself, make yourself force yourself to think about these various domains, because these days so much material is available all over the places. Our duty is to just bring it together, collate it, and present it in a way that will be easier for us to understand, digest, and learn in the coming weeks. So should I end here, or anybody's having any question to, or anything to share in the class today? So I have recorded this class, and I'm going to put a link. I'm going to put this class on the YouTube channel, and I'm going to put the link back, so that you can, those who have not attended, they can go through, and if you have missed something out, you can again go back to it and reflect on it. Okay. So thank you so much. See you in the next class.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.